A man runs barefoot through the snow. His feet should be freezing, but he screams that they are burning. 18 feet between each stride. Inhuman. His tracks stretch longer and longer until they simply stop, as if he rose into the air and vanished. This is not a werewolf. This is not a demon with antlers. This is not the creature Hollywood has been selling you for decades. This is the Wendigo. And the real transformation has nothing to do with claws or fangs. It happens inside, in the place where your soul used to be. This is the Pandora's Project. Tonight, we unseal the records that reveal what the indigenous peoples of North America actually feared, and why their warnings were never meant to entertain. They were meant to save you from becoming something that can never be human again. If you seek the truth behind the sanitized versions, subscribe. If you want to understand what drove people to cross a line that cannot be uncrossed, stay until the end. The archives are open. The evidence is waiting. But first, we need to talk about everything the movies got wrong. Part 1. The Antler Lie. If you have seen any movie, television show, or video game featuring a Wendigo, you have been lied to. The creature in Antlers has antlers. The Wendigo in Until Dawn has antlers. The versions in Supernatural, in Grimm, in Fallout 76, all share the same features. Antlers sprouting from the skull, claws extending from the fingers. A body 9 feet tall, hunched and monstrous. A deer-werewolf hybrid that stalks the forest and devours anyone foolish enough to enter its territory. This is not the Wendigo. These films and games took one kernel of truth from the original folklore and buried it under Hollywood horror aesthetics. That kernel is cannibalism. Yes, the Wendigo is connected to the consumption of human flesh. But everything else, the antlers, the claws, the towering physique, the transformation into a literal monster, none of this exists in the original stories. By turning the Wendigo into a literal monster, Hollywood made it something you could fight, something external, something that was not you. And in doing so, they erased the real warning. They made it safe. The real Wendigo comes from the Algonquian-speaking peoples of North America, the Ojibwe, whose territories stretched across the Great Lakes region where the United States and Canada meet. The Cree, whose lands covered the eastern Canadian forests, that vast wilderness of pine and snow that extends north beyond where most Europeans dared to venture. The Innu, the Anishinaabe, and other nations whose survival depended on hunting in some of the harshest winter conditions on the continent. These peoples did not tell stories about monsters for entertainment. They told stories to survive. And their Wendigo looked nothing like what you have seen on screen. In his book, The Manitou, which preserves the spiritual knowledge and supernatural world of the Ojibwe people, native author Basil H. Johnston describes the Wendigo in terms that should make your stomach turn. Not because of fangs or claws, but because of what it represents. Gaunt to the point of emaciation. Desiccated skin pulled tightly over bones. Complexion, the ash gray of death. Eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. Lips tattered and bloody. The smell of decay and decomposition radiating from the body. This is not a monster. This is a human being who has lost everything that made them human. The Hollywood version can be killed with a silver bullet or a well-placed arrow. The real version cannot be killed so easily, because the transformation is not physical. It is spiritual. The body wastes away, yes, but only because the soul has already rotted. Johnston explains that the word Wendigo itself comes from Anishinaabe roots meaning solely for self. The Wendigo cares nothing for the wants and needs of other people. Not family. Not friends. Not the tribe that raised them. The only desire that remains is to consume human flesh, and there is no concern whatsoever about who suffers to satisfy that craving. But here is what Hollywood never shows you. The craving does not come from an evil spirit possessing an innocent victim. It does not come from a curse placed on sacred ground. It does not come from radiation or infection or any external force. It comes from the thing we fear most: starvation. And what happens next is far worse than growing antlers. Part 2. Wisdom in the Cold. The winters in the Northern Territories are not like winters most people experience. In the Great Lakes region, in the forests of eastern Canada, temperatures plunge to levels that can kill an exposed person in hours. Snow buries the landscape for months. Animals disappear into hibernation or migrate south. And for the Indigenous peoples who lived in these territories, survival depended entirely on what they had hunted and stored before the cold arrived. When the hunt failed, people starved. And when people starved long enough, some of them made a choice that could never be unmade. An explorer named John Tanner, who was captured as a child and lived among the Ojibwe and Chippewa peoples for 30 years, documented exactly this scenario. Tanner, who earned the trust of the tribes and was nicknamed White Indian, wrote about a man in his hunting band who had eaten his own wife during a winter famine. Tanner described this man as a rather insignificant person and a poor hunter. When the food ran out, when the cold became unbearable, when desperation overwhelmed everything else, this man killed and consumed his wife to survive. The tribe wanted to kill him immediately. Not because they were cruel, not because they lacked understanding of his desperation. They wanted to kill him because they knew what he had become. They did not act out of hatred or revenge. They killed him because they loved their families more than they pitied him. It was an act of protection, of mercy, for him and for everyone who would have been his next meal. Once you tasted human flesh, you could never stop. The craving would consume you. Your heart would turn to ice, and eventually, you would come for the rest of the tribe. This is the real horror of the Wendigo. Not a monster that attacks from the forest, but a neighbor, a friend, a family member who has crossed a line that transforms them into something that can no longer be trusted. A Cree elder, speaking in an interview preserved in ethnographic records, explained this transformation with words that carry the weight of generations of observation. When a person came to be in that state, he is no longer an ordinary human. It does not bother him how cruel it is. And in time, if he eats again and again, if he eats the meat of the human flesh, it gets numb. It does not have any more feeling, and his heart became like ice. There is no sympathy. There is no right, no human richness. Meat is all that counts. The heart became like ice. This phrase appears again and again in Wendigo accounts. The physical body wastes away from malnutrition, yes. The skin turns gray. The smell of decay clings to the person because they are quite literally rotting from the inside. But the true transformation happens in the heart, in the soul, in whatever part of a human being that makes them care about others. That part dies first. And here is the most disturbing part. Once the craving begins, it never stops. Not after one meal. Not after rescue. Not after years of trying to return to normal life. The hunger remains, insatiable and eternal. The transformation is permanent. The stories were never meant to simply frighten people around a campfire. They were warnings. Lessons passed down through generations that no matter how desperate you become, no matter how hungry, no matter how certain you are that you will die without food, you must never resort to eating your own kind. Because if you do, you will never be the same again. Your tribe will abandon you, or they will hunt you down, kill you, and burn your body to ash. Every part of you. Your clothes, your blood, your flesh, and especially your heart, the frozen thing that used to beat with human warmth. Fire is the only way to truly kill a Wendigo, because you cannot reason with it. You cannot appeal to its humanity. That humanity is already gone. But there is another layer to these warnings that many people miss. The stories also taught conservation. It was the hunter's responsibility to not kill more animals than necessary, because overhunting could put the entire tribe into a desperate situation. A situation where the unthinkable became the only option. The Wendigo was not just a monster. It was a consequence. A consequence of greed, of poor planning, of placing immediate survival above the welfare of the community. And in 1910, a writer named Algernon Blackwood published a story that captured what this transformation might actually look like. His account reads less like fiction and more like testimony from someone who had witnessed the horror firsthand. The evidence he left behind is waiting in the next archive. Part 3. The Blackwood Testimony. The story begins with a hunting party venturing into the Canadian wilderness. 4 men seeking moose after local hunters returned, claiming the usual grounds were empty of wildlife. Dr. Cathcart, his nephew Simpson, and their 2 guides, Hank Davis and Joseph DeFago, friends for decades. They also had an Indigenous man with them, known as Punk, who was responsible for cooking and maintaining the camp. After a full day of searching without finding a single track, the group considered exploring the far side of the lake where they had made camp. This is when Joseph DeFago's demeanor changed completely. He would not explain why he was reluctant. He insisted he was not afraid of anything in those woods. But his companions could see the fear in his eyes. Something about that territory terrified him. The next morning, the party split. Hank and the doctor headed west. DeFago and Simpson, the inexperienced nephew on his first hunting expedition, paddled east across the lake. Days of travel into increasingly remote wilderness. Simpson knew nothing about survival. He was completely dependent on DeFago, who educated him along the way, teaching him how to read the land, how to find his way back to camp if they became separated. After another fruitless day of hunting, they made camp as the sun set. The evening started pleasantly enough, eating rations, smoking tobacco, singing ballads around the fire. 2 men enjoying the wilderness. Then DeFago stopped singing. His voice dropped to barely more than a whisper. Simpson froze. Something was wrong. DeFago stood, smelled the air, and pointed toward their canoe. His eyes widened. The color drained from his face. Simpson asked what was wrong. DeFago denied everything, blamed the song for bringing up bad memories. But his terror was obvious, and his denial only made Simpson more paranoid. What could be out here that frightened an experienced outdoorsman this badly? They went to sleep in the tent, staying close for warmth and safety. Hours later, Simpson woke to strange sounds. The wind, the waves on the lake, and DeFago crying with a blanket pressed against his mouth to muffle the noise. Simpson tried to shake him, to get answers. No response. Then he noticed DeFago's feet hanging outside the tent opening into the freezing cold, as if something had tried to pull him out. The young man bundled himself up and tried to sleep. He failed. A few hours before dawn, Simpson was jolted awake by violent movement. DeFago was shaking, huddled against him, trying to get away from the tent opening, as if something was waiting just outside. Then came a voice, unlike any sound Simpson had heard before. Rough and demanding, but also strangely sweet. 3 distinct notes calling from the darkness. Before Simpson could process what he heard, DeFago jumped to his feet and bolted out of the tent. His body moved as if he had no control over it. And then he screamed words that would haunt Simpson for the rest of his life. "Oh, my feet of fire, my burning feet of fire. Oh, what great height and fiery speed." And then DeFago was gone. Along with the voice came a smell, strange and putrid, the scent of something rotting. Simpson tried to chase his guide, but knew he was unprepared. He ate breakfast to clear his mind, grabbed his rifle, and followed the footprints in the snow. What he found made his blood run cold. Animal tracks ran alongside DeFago's prints, but Simpson could not identify what animal had made them. Stranger still, Defago's footprints were changing as he tracked them. The stride grew longer, impossibly longer. The distance between prints stretched to 18 feet apart. No human could run with such a stride. And the prints themselves were transforming, growing larger, rounder, as if Defago's feet were becoming something else. Then the track stopped. Simpson searched in every direction, called out until his voice went hoarse. Then he heard Defago's voice screaming from somewhere above him. Above him. In the trees or in the sky, he could not tell. Screaming about burning feet. Simpson searched for hours. Nothing. As the sun set, he had no choice but to return to camp alone. The journey back was a nightmare. Every cracking twig sounded like the creature returning. Every gust of wind carried whispers from behind the trees. He felt watched the entire way. He made it back to his campsite just in time to start a fire before complete darkness. He kept that fire burning all night. His rifle never left his hands. The next morning, he paddled back to base camp. He arrived at midnight, guided by the distant glow of his uncle's fire. When he told them what had happened, they were skeptical. They assumed the intensity of the wilderness had affected his mind. But they agreed to search for Defago. After Simpson slept, sedated by his uncle's medicine, the 3 remaining men crossed the lake. They searched the entire day without success. That night, around the campfire, Hank told them about the Wendigo. The call of the wild personified, he said. A voice that sounds like wind, falling water, cries of animals. Once someone hears it, they are gone for good. The most vulnerable points are the feet and the eyes. The feet for the lust of wandering. The eyes for the lust of beauty. The poor soul runs at such dreadful speed that he bleeds beneath the eyes and his feet burn until they drop off and new ones form, exactly like the Wendigo's own feet. The footprints Simpson had been tracking. The transformation made terrible sense. Then, without warning, Hank stood and screamed into the darkness. Another voice answered from above. Defago, screaming about his fiery feet. The sound of something heavy falling through trees. A thud. Footsteps crunching in snow. A figure emerged just beyond the firelight, moving like a puppet controlled by strings. Jerky. Wrong. It rushed toward Simpson, and he saw the face of Joseph Defago coming at him. Here I am, Boss Simpson. I heard someone calling me. But this was not Joe. The skin on his face hung loose, like a mask that did not quite fit. The smell of decay rolled off him in waves. It was as if something was wearing Defago's face, and they were all too afraid to see what was underneath. Hank, rattled at the sight of his old friend, lay down in the tent but kept watching. When the thing that looked like Joe sat down, Hank cried out, "Oh God, look at his feet." Simpson looked. 2 round black masses where Joe's moccasins should have been. The doctor tackled Joe, trying to cover his legs with a blanket. But Joe's face contorted into something monstrous, and he said, "You have seen it too. You have seen my fiery, burning feet." Hank tried to run after him. The doctor tackled Hank to the ground, knowing he would suffer the same fate if he stepped into the shadows. Seconds later, they heard Joe's cries rising above them, growing more distant, fading into the sky. Then silence. The smell vanished. The only sound was the crackling fire. The next morning, they returned to base camp. Punk was gone, but lying by the ashes of the campfire was Defago. What was left of him? His mind was broken beyond repair. He could not remember the past few days or his life before. His face held no expression. Fear, recognition, nothing. He did not know who was embracing him, feeding him, speaking words of comfort. The thing that made him an individual person had vanished forever. He muttered like a child about his burning feet. And this time, His complaints made sense. His feet were severely frostbitten. His eyes showed signs of recent bleeding. No one knew how he had made it back to camp. He had no canoe. He would have had to travel over 100 miles around the lake on those damaged feet. They later learned that Punk had seen Defago stumbling toward him. When Punk got close enough to smell that putrid odor, he turned and fled. He completed the journey home in 3 days, driven by terror. The terror of his entire race. He knew what that smell meant. Joe Defago had seen the Wendigo. A few weeks later, without a mind or soul left to inhabit his body, Joseph Defago died. The wilderness had taken everything from him. But the most disturbing part of Blackwood's account is not the horror of Defago's fate. It is the question that lingered in the minds of everyone who survived. Was this supernatural possession? Or was it something that could happen to anyone pushed far enough? Psychiatrists would eventually provide an answer. And that answer might be even more terrifying than evil spirits. Part 4. The diagnosis. The American Psychiatric Association officially recognizes a condition called Wendigo psychosis. This is not folklore. This is not legend. This is a clinical diagnosis in medical literature. The condition is described as a severe culture-bound syndrome occurring among northern Algonquian Indians living in Canada and the northeastern United States. It is characterized by delusions of becoming possessed by a flesh-eating monster, the Wendigo, and manifests in symptoms including depression, violence, a compulsive desire for human flesh, and sometimes actual cannibalism. The key phrase is culture-bound syndrome. The belief in Wendigos was so deeply embedded in the worldview of these peoples that the fear of becoming one could actually trigger the transformation. Consider what this means. In 1879, a man named Swift Runner walked out of the northern Alberta wilderness alone. His wife and 6 children had entered with him during the winter. When authorities investigated the campsite, they found bones cracked open for marrow, skulls, remains of an entire family. Swift Runner claimed the Wendigo had possessed him, that an evil spirit had forced him to kill and consume his family one by one. He became the first man legally hanged in Alberta. But the question that haunted those who studied the case was this: did an evil spirit actually possess Swift Runner? Or had starvation and isolation broken something inside his mind that made him believe he was becoming a Wendigo, which then caused him to act out the transformation he feared? A self-fulfilling prophecy written in blood. The Indigenous peoples told stories of the Wendigo to warn against cannibalism. But those very stories may have planted the seeds for the condition they were trying to prevent. If you believed strongly enough that eating human flesh would transform you into a monster with an insatiable hunger, and if you found yourself desperate enough to commit that act, the psychological horror of what you had done might actually create the symptoms you feared. The craving that cannot be satisfied, the loss of empathy, the heart turning to ice. These could be the mind's way of processing an act so horrific that it shatters your sense of self. You are no longer human because you cannot accept that a human being could do what you have done. The gray skin, the emaciated frame, the smell of decay, these are the physical consequences of severe malnutrition. The same malnutrition that drove the person to cannibalism in the first place. The bleeding eyes that Blackwood described, the frostbitten feet, the inability to remember, these are documented symptoms of extreme exposure and psychological trauma. The Wendigo is real, but perhaps not in the way the stories described. It is the breaking point of the human mind, the place where desperation overwhelms morality, where the survival instinct overrides the social bonds that make us human, where the horror of your own actions destroys your ability to function as a person. The Indigenous peoples understood this at a profound level. They knew that some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed, that some transformations were permanent, that some corruptions of the soul could not be healed. They encoded this knowledge into stories that warned against greed, against selfishness, against placing your own survival above the welfare of your community. And they were right. The Wendigo is not a creature hiding in the forest, waiting to possess you. It is a potential that exists within every person. The potential to become something that cares only for itself, something with a heart of ice. The question is not whether evil spirits exist. The question is not whether you are a good person or a bad person. The question is how far you can be pushed before you stop being a person at all, before survival erases everything else, before you become the monster yourself. Final part. The breaking seals. Hollywood gave the Wendigo antlers because antlers are frightening. They gave it claws because claws sell tickets. They turned a spiritual transformation into a physical monster because audiences understand creatures they can see it. But they missed the entire point. The Wendigo is not scary because it has fangs. It is scary because it used to be your neighbor, your friend, your father, someone who loved you, who would have protected you, who shared food with you around the fire. Until they did not. Until the winter grew too long and the hunger grew too strong, and something inside them broke in a way that could never be repaired. The indigenous peoples of North America understood something that modern horror films have forgotten. The most terrifying monsters are not the ones that come from outside. They are the ones that emerge from within. Greed, desperation, the willingness to consume others to feed yourself. The Wendigo is a warning that remains relevant centuries after it was first spoken around fires in the northern wilderness. A warning that when you place yourself solely for self, when you abandon the bonds of community, when you cross lines that should never be crossed, you do not just harm others. You lose yourself. And what remains is something with a heart of ice, something that looks human but is not, something that can never be satisfied no matter how much it consumes. If you stayed this far, you understand why these truths matter. The original stories were never entertainment. They were survival. They were wisdom. They were a map of the boundaries that keep us human. Like this episode, if seeing what was hidden matters to you, subscribe to the Pandora's Project so you are here when we unseal the next archive. And comment below with the version of this story you grew up with, if any, or which tale you think we should open next. Your memories and questions decide which sealed doors we unlock. The forest is always waiting. The hunger is always there. See you in the next tomb.